Have you ever noticed that some of the kindest black people you know are also some of the most tired? The ones who always check in? Who always send the "let me know if you need anything" text? Who show up with food, with jokes, with softness, with patience, even when no one remembers the last time they were the ones being held? On the surface, they seem unshakable, warm, grounded, the safe friend, the understanding coworker, the strong one in the family who keeps the peace when tension rises. But if you look closely, if you really sit with them in the quiet moments, you can see it. The heaviness behind the smile, the pause before they say, "It's okay, don't worry about it." The way their eyes wander when someone calls them so kind, like it's a compliment and a contract at the same time. We talk about black strength. We talk about black resilience. We talk about black excellence. But rarely do we talk about the cost of being the kind black person, the one who absorbs hurt, manages everyone's comfort, and learns too early that kindness, for them, is not always just a choice. Sometimes it's a survival strategy. It doesn't start with a decision. No one wakes up and says, "I'm gonna become the kind black person, so no one feels threatened by me." It starts much earlier, much softer, maybe in a classroom where you raise your hand with the right answer and the teacher seems pleasantly surprised. So you learn that being smart is good as long as it's packaged gently. Maybe it's the first time you express frustration and someone says you're overreacting, too sensitive, or worse, aggressive. So you learn that your anger is dangerous even when it's justified. Maybe it happens when a relative pulls you aside and says, "Just be nice, don't give them a reason. Smile, you don't want them to think you're rude. Let it go, you know how they are." The message sinks in quietly. Your safety, your acceptance, your opportunities might depend on how easy you are to be around. So you train yourself to be easy. You soften your tone. You laugh off comments that sting. You listen more than you speak. You apologize when you're the one who's hurt. You become the one who smooths over tension, who explains, educates, forgives. Little by little, you stop asking, "What do I feel?" and start asking, "What do they need from me?" And without noticing, you begin to disappear behind your kindness. Not because you lack personality, but because you've learned that kindness is the safest armor in a world that is quick to misunderstand black emotion. Psychologists have a word for what starts to form here: fawning. It's a survival response, a way of staying safe by being agreeable, helpful, accommodating. Instead of fighting, instead of fleeing, you tend, soothe, over-understand. For black people, this often intertwines with something deeper: racial respectability, the unspoken rule that you must be especially kind, especially patient, especially composed to counter stereotypes you did not create. You're not just being nice. You're managing other people's fear, other people's discomfort, other people's projections. There is also compassion fatigue, usually used to describe caregivers, therapists, nurses. But it fits here too. The kind black person is often the one everyone turns to for emotional support, for explanations about racism, for reassurance that it's okay, even when it's not. They absorb more pain than they release. They hold more stories than they share. At some point, kindness stops being a pure expression of your heart and becomes a role you feel responsible for performing. On the outside, it still looks like generosity. But on the inside, something else is growing. An exhaustion, a quiet resentment, a sense that you are loved most when you are easiest to carry. And that is where the wound lives. Not in the kindness itself, but in the belief that you must keep giving, even when there is nothing left. 4. The deep internalization phase. Over time, the performance becomes identity. You're the one who understands where everyone is coming from, the one who gives people the benefit of the doubt even when they've shown you exactly who they are. You say, "It's fine, don't worry about it," more times than you can count. You check on people who never check on you. You show up for birthdays, breakups, crises, and late-night phone calls. Then go home to your own unspoken heaviness. Inside, a quiet split opens. There is the version of you the world sees. Patient, stable, endlessly forgiving. And there is the version of you that rarely gets air. The one who's tired, the one who's angry, the one who wants to say, no, not this time. But that second version has learned something painful. That when black people set boundaries, they can quickly be labeled ungrateful, cold, or changed. So you keep that version tucked away. Your nervous system starts to learn a pattern. If I am kind, I am safe. If I am kind, I am chosen. If I am kind, I am less likely to be seen as a problem. And so kindness becomes more than a habit. It becomes your currency, your way of paying for acceptance, peace, survival. In group settings, you become the diffuser of tension. You laugh off microaggressions. You translate jokes that didn't land. You explain why something was offensive, but in a tone soft enough not to make anyone feel guilty. You exist in rooms as a cushion, absorbing impact so others don't have to feel it. The danger is subtle. When you spend years being the cushion, you start believing that everyone else's comfort matters more than your own pain, and slowly, you stop looking inward at all. Your body knows before your mind does. Sleep feels less restful. Your chest feels heavier after certain conversations. You feel strangely lonely in spaces where everyone likes you but very few know you. This is the dark side of being the kind black person. You become visible and invisible at the same time. Seen for what you give, ignored for what you carry. There is a particular kind of loneliness that lives in this role. The loneliness of being praised for kindness while quietly wondering if anyone would still stay if you stopped being so understanding. The loneliness of knowing people depend on your softness, but rarely make room for your sharp edges, your rage, your grief. You start to notice how often your "it's okay" does not mean it didn't hurt. How often your "don't worry about it" hides the fact that you are worrying about it. How often your "I got you" really means, "I wish someone would get me." There is grief in realizing you have been emotionally parenting other people, friends, partners, co-workers, while no one has truly known how to parent you emotionally. There is grief in remembering the first time you learned to swallow your feelings because someone else looked too uncomfortable with your truth. There is grief in the racial layer too. Knowing that part of why you overextend is because you've been taught directly or indirectly that you must be extra good to counteract what the world assumes, that you must smile through insults, that you must be endlessly gracious when people mean well but harm you anyway. So you grieve quietly. Not just for the kindness you give away, but for the parts of you that had to go quiet in order to keep others at ease. This grief rarely has words. It shows up as a sigh at the end of the day, a tightness in the throat when you think about saying no, a flicker of envy when you see someone else be unapologetically themselves without worrying how it will be read. And beneath all of it, a question that echoes but rarely gets spoken. When is it my turn to be cared for without having to earn it through kindness? Beneath the poetry, there is a nervous system trying to cope. When you grow up in a world where being black means being misread, over-policed, or stereotyped, your brain adapts. It learns to scan, to anticipate tension, to sense when a room is shifting, to feel when someone's tone isn't safe, even if their words sound polite. This is racial battle fatigue, the cumulative stress of constant subtle defense. Layer compassion on top of that, and you get a nervous system that is always on, soothing others, diffusing discomfort, staying agreeable. Neuroscience tells us that the brain has mirror neurons, cells that help us feel what others feel. In highly empathetic people, these systems are very active. They feel other people's pain almost as their own. Now imagine that level of empathy combined with a lifetime of racialized vigilance. You don't just notice tension. You rush to solve it. You don't just feel others hurt. You feel responsible for easing it, even when you didn't cause it. Over time, your body associates safety with being needed, pleasant, helpful. Psychologists might call some of this pathological altruism, helping to the point that it harms you. But for the kind Black person, it is also learned survival. It has kept you from conflict. It has protected you from being labeled difficult. It has softened the harshness of environments that were not built with you in mind. The tragedy is not that you became kind. The tragedy is that kindness became the only version of you you believed the world would accept. By the time this person reaches adulthood, the role is well rehearsed. At work, they are the one who supports everyone, who organizes, remembers, encourages. They listen to coworkers' frustrations, but rarely express their own. They become the unspoken emotional anchor of the team. In friendships, they are the one people call at 2 a.m., the one who gives thoughtful advice, who holds space without judgment, who remembers birthdays and big days and hard days. In family structures, they often become the fixer, the one who mediates conflicts, who checks on elders, who carries generational responsibility quietly. Romantically, they may choose partners who are drawn to their warmth but unprepared to hold their depth. They pour and pour, hoping their consistency will earn reciprocity. Sometimes they are praised for being so strong, so giving, such a good one. But under the praise, patterns emerge. They struggle to say no. They feel guilty resting. They question whether their needs are too much. They feel responsible for everyone's emotional climate. They often don't know how to receive without offering something back. And when they are finally alone, they feel a strange emptiness, a sense that everyone knows what they do, but very few know who they are. The outside world reads this as goodness, but inside it can start to feel like erasure, because being the kind Black person can slowly become a life where you are essential to everyone except yourself. The shift rarely comes in a dramatic scene. It arrives in quieter moments. Maybe it's the day they realize they are exhausted after every interaction, even with people they love. Maybe it's the moment they hear themselves say, "Don't worry, I've got it." And something inside whispers, "I'm so tired of having it." Maybe it's when they watch someone else set a boundary, calmly, clearly, and notice how deeply that both inspires and unsettles them. At some point, a truth begins to surface. This isn't just kindness. This is self-abandonment dressed as kindness. They notice how much of their identity is built around making others comfortable, how rarely they are honest about their own needs, how often they swallow anger not because it isn't valid, but because they fear what it will cost them. And then the recognition lands. You thought this was simply who you are, but so much of it is who you became to survive, to be chosen, to be safe. The realization is not cruel, it is clarifying. For the first time, they see the distance between their true self and the endlessly accommodating version the world has rewarded. And once you see that gap, you cannot unsee it. This is where harsh self-judgment might try to creep in. Why didn't I speak up sooner? Why did I let people treat me like that? Why did I keep saying yes? But a gentler truth is needed here. You weren't weak. You were adaptive. You did what you had to do in a world that told you directly and indirectly that being too loud, too honest, too firm could be dangerous for someone like you. You chose kindness because kindness felt safer than anger. Because empathy made you feel powerful in spaces where you otherwise felt small. Because giving made you feel valuable when the world tried to convince you that your worth was conditional. Every time you softened your voice, you were trying to protect yourself. Every time you laughed off a painful comment, you were trying to keep the peace. Every time you overextended yourself, you were trying not to lose love. It makes sense. The goal now is not to regret who you were. It's to understand who you became and why. To look at the version of you who carried everyone, who loved beyond capacity, who stayed gentle in an unkind world and say, you were doing the best you could with what you were given. That is the beginning of self-forgiveness. Not a dismissal of harm, but a recognition of your own humanity. Healing does not mean becoming less kind. It means letting your kindness include you. It begins quietly, not with a grand declaration, but with a small internal shift. You start to notice when your body tightens as you prepare to say yes. You start to hear the lie in, "It's fine," when it isn't. You start to feel the weight of always being the safe place for people who have never learned how to be safe for you. Instead of immediately fixing, you pause. Instead of rushing in, you listen to the part of you that aches. You begin to understand that your boundaries are not a betrayal of your culture, your family, your faith, or your identity as a good person. They are a form of sacred honesty. You might not announce this out loud. You might not change your behavior overnight. True healing is slower than that. It looks like small moments of truth. Admitting to yourself when something hurt. Letting yourself feel anger without shaming it. Allowing rest without earning it first. Little by little, you start to imagine a version of kindness that isn't constantly draining you. Kindness that doesn't require you to disappear. Kindness that flows from fullness, not from fear. You realize that the world taught you to be generous to everyone but yourself. Healing is the gentle act of finally turning some of that generosity inward. Not to become selfish, but to become whole. In the end, the dark side of being the kind black person is not that you love too much. It's that you were never taught that your love belonged to you first. You learned to protect others from discomfort, even when no one was protecting you from harm. You learned to be gentle in a world that wasn't gentle back. But something is changing now. You are starting to see that your heart is not a resource to be endlessly mined. It is a home, and you are allowed to live in it too. The compliments, "You're so kind, you're so strong, you're such a good one," no longer land the same way. You don't reject them. But you listen for a deeper question. Am I allowed to be human here, or only helpful? The child in you, the one who learned to keep everyone else comfortable, is slowly met by an older, softer presence. The version of you who knows now that kindness without self-connection is just another way of disappearing. And as you begin to return to yourself, your kindness doesn't vanish. It becomes clearer, sharper, truer. It becomes the kind of kindness that does not swallow your voice to protect others, but honors your voice as part of the healing. The world may still praise you for being kind, but quietly within you will know the truth. You are no longer kind because you are afraid not to be. You are kind because it is who you are, and now finally that includes you.